the recording. And
wonderful.
Yeah, hello again, everyone. Hello to everyone who's already been part of the assembly this morning, and hello to everyone who's now joining for John's input on jobs in zero waste. And of course, hello to John. Thank you for being here and presenting this data and your study. Yeah, for your information for everyone, we're recording this session. So everyone who cannot join to this right now can take a look at it afterwards. Yeah, so I think that's for the introduction. Yeah, I've already told you we're Runder, Tisch, Reparatur, so we're many different actors from various different backgrounds here in the audience. But yeah, we're all interested in repair and how we can foster repair and repair policies in Germany and on a European level as well. So we're very interested in what you're having to tell us tonight. So John is going to start with his input, and which will take around 15 to 20 minutes, and then we have the chance to ask him questions and discuss what he has told us. So yeah, John, maybe you can introduce yourself and start.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to turn off my camera here so I can see my monitor better. Not have it pointed right. I have to, anyway, logistics of it. Hello, everyone. My name is John Ribeiro-Broomhead. I'm an analyst for the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, also known as GAIA. And for a little bit on my background is in environmental policy with a focus on air quality and human well-being, human health. I'm calling in from San Francisco, California. And, you know, of course, first and foremost, I hope you all and loved ones are as safe and healthy as can be, you know, all things considered. I know we're juggling at least 2 languages. I apologize, I can't offer any of this in German, but if I get going too fast, or, you know, feel free to please stop me at any point, ask me to repeat something or slow down. I tend to get excited, and as a Californian, I often slur my speech. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. A little bit about GAIA as an organization. I was telling some folks earlier, we represent over 800 community grassroots groups, non-government organizations and individuals worldwide in over 90 countries. And we advocate for cleaner waste systems, for zero waste systems, for cleaner air, cleaner water, and better working conditions for waste workers, particularly in places where there's less of a formal waste infrastructure. And my job is putting together resources for these organizations, for organizations like Runder, Tisch, and Reparatur, I believe that's the pronunciation. And it's about putting together resources for organizations on the ground that are organizing actions, that are working with their legislators for a cleaner world, as you all are. And this report in particular is about the incredible job creation potential of zero waste systems. And as you might imagine, it was born out of the urgency created by the pandemic and the global recession. And so we thought it would be a great opportunity to really underline to governments around the world, as unemployment rates are rising, as governments have to cut their budgets, we want to point out that zero waste systems don't just have these great environmental benefits, but they have this really strong economic benefit compared to landfill, compared to incineration, which is to say that zero waste creates better jobs. As you all know, repair in particular provides a great opportunity for more skilled work in waste prevention. And it also creates a lot more jobs. And we're not talking about, I hope you can, we can see my cursor, I think that'll work out great. But we're not talking about just a couple more jobs. We're talking about potentially hundreds of more jobs created to process the same amount of waste that would either be landfilled or incinerated, buried or burned, as we like to talk about. And as you can see here, this is basically the high-level summary of our findings from this report, which the way to read this is just to say that for every landfill or incineration, somewhere around 7 jobs can be created if that same weight, that same tonnage of material was composted. Something like 55 jobs could be created for every 2 jobs in landfill incineration if that same tonnage was remanufactured, which for the purposes of this report, we defined as, production of new goods, new consumer goods from recycled material. But the recycling process itself, the sorting and processing, can create over 115 jobs for every 2 created in landfill incineration. And then we get to your specialty, repair. And we're talking about, as you know, a labor-intensive process. We found, on average, over 400 jobs produced for every 2 created in landfill incineration. And so what we see here is this, we didn't plan this, but this really strong hierarchy of job creation as you kind of move up the food chain in energy savings, in the labor intensity. And if we think about this from an environmental standpoint, down here with landfill or incineration, worse for the environment, worse for human health, pollutes the air, pollutes the water, pollutes the ground, creates carbon emissions, produces the fewest number of jobs. You go up one level and we're rescuing organic material from the landfill and from incineration, and that has embedded energy. So that has some significant environmental impacts. And it also has a significant jump in the number of jobs created, over 3 times as many jobs. And then we go up another level and we're doing aluminum cans, plastics, higher energy intensive materials. And obviously that's better for the environment, but it's also incredibly, powerful when it comes to job production. There's this huge jump in the number of jobs, a 10-fold increase in the case of remanufacturing or in the case and recycling. And then you go up to repair, and the jump from an aluminum can to a smartphone is huge in terms of energy resources that are invested, and you're still saving that smartphone from landfill or incineration. So you get up to smartphones, computers, washing machines, furniture, and there's a huge environmental impact. And so the point we found here, which was really interesting, is once again, environmental goals line up with economic goals. You can create jobs and make things better for human health and for the planet. So how did we get these numbers? Which is, my understanding, is kind of what I want to hear about today. It was actually incredibly simple. Basically, the main input was not brains on my part, but time. I just had to go out and read as much as I could, reading academic papers, looking up, reports from municipalities, city governments, corporate sustainability publications, calling up waste management companies, and basically just trying to find out any instances of job production and tonnage handled. So I was talking to a compost plant, for example, and they said, we employ 30 people and we process 20,000 tons, 20,000 tons of organic material per year. Just slap that into my little Excel spreadsheet, and we got 15 jobs per 10,000 tons per year as an estimate for the number of jobs created by composting. And we did that for a bunch of other cases. We have something like 60-odd sources for this report, and average them to get these figures. So that's how we got these numbers. These numbers are the number of jobs per 10,000 tons of waste material processed. And one thing to note here that I think would be particularly important if you were interested in calculating the same, a local version of this repair number, is that for each category, the jobs figure actually varied significantly. So I made these up, the 1, 5, and 15 off the top of my head. But I think this is indicative of what the literature is like, is that it varies greatly from place to place. It varies greatly based on local conditions. It varies greatly based on the material you're talking about. As I'm sure you can imagine, you know, recycling cans is different than recycling plastic bottles. Repairing phones is different than repairing furniture. Oh, is there another comment? Okay. So there's significant local variation that I think would be important to incorporate. So these numbers are kind of global averages, which we used for the purposes of our report to illustrate this kind of hierarchy and illustrate the power that zero waste has. But if you were to do, you know, wanted to advocate on a local level, I think you could use these numbers, if only to demonstrate the magnitude of difference between what you're talking about up here and what the status quo is, you know, down here, and maybe a little bit in recycling and composting for most places. But it's probably a good idea to calculate your own numbers. And so we took a stab at doing that for a number of cities using our averages just as ballpark estimates. And the way we did that is we took a particular city. We did them for, you know, a bunch of different cities around the world: Sao Paulo, London, Brussels, and we looked at their waste stream. And so if we were calculating the composting jobs, for example, it was really simple. We just said, okay, how many tons of organic material does this city produce? And let's say they produce 200,000 tons. We say, okay, we know there's an average out there in the world of about 7 jobs per 10,000 tons produced. Just multiply it by the tonnage. In this case, we're assuming that 100% gets composted. You know, there's no loss here, which of course in the real world is not the case. Just for this example, that's not what we assumed. And you multiply those together and you get 140 jobs in composting, which, you know, is not mind-blowing. It's not going to completely change somebody's mind who's against composting into being, you know, a #1 advocate for it. But, you know, it's non-negligible, and it's larger. Certainly, it's going to be about 3 times larger than the number of jobs that could be produced in landfilling or incineration. But then you move up the hierarchy of waste prevention here, and you go to repair with 400 jobs per 10,000 tons. And let's say the same city produces 200,000 tons of repairable goods. Now we're talking about over 8,000 jobs produced by repair. A little harder to ignore. And then you take those repair jobs and you add them to recycling jobs that could be created, and the remanufacturing jobs that could be created, and our friendly little compost jobs from the previous slide. And all of a sudden, you know, there's thousands and thousands of jobs that could be created in and near a city that's all supported by the waste stream, supported by material that is otherwise just buried or burned. And all of a sudden, you're seeing a compelling economic argument for moving into zero waste, really robust zero waste programs, as opposed to just landfill or incineration, status quo. And we did this for a number of cities. As I mentioned, here's an example of London we actually assumed 80% recycling and composting, and we calculated the new jobs created in recycling by elevating their recycling rate. We calculated the new jobs in remanufacturing by elevating their remanufacturing rates, new jobs in composting, and of course the small number of jobs lost in disposal. And no matter where we went, city by city, the net jobs created by getting to 80% recycling and composting far, far outweighed the jobs lost in disposal. Now, we were not actually able to calculate any of these numbers for repair, because repair data is actually data on repairable goods in the waste stream. It's actually a little bit hard to come by. For most most analysis out there, even when the math is as simple as it is here, data constraints are always the problem. And repairable goods are a little bit harder to manage. But in general, as I'm sure you all run into, it's just also not quite as, it's not on the radar as much for most cities. So without that data, it would be difficult to calculate the number, an estimate for a number of jobs for cities where you live. But you have the advantage of being there in person, whereas I've just been kind of scraping the internet and making phone calls. But more importantly, I think there are some great resources and opportunities or sources of this information that are probably pretty easy to tap, particularly if you have resources on the ground in that city. Which is to say that city governments are already starting to study their waste streams in a lot of places. And they tend to look at recyclable content and compostable content first, because they are being met with zero waste goals that the mandates that they have to comply with. They're being met with carbon emission goals that they have to comply with. And also they're just running out of space in their landfills. Or their incinerators are aging. And they're just feeling the pressure, and they're realizing zero waste is the future. It's a wave worldwide. So it might just take a little bit of an extra push to say, hey, you're looking at recyclable content, and you also look at repairable content in your waste stream. And if the themselves. In many places, particularly where there's strong zero waste programs, the waste companies I found have actually been fairly forthcoming. Particularly if you're not coming from an organization that calls, in the name it says, for incinerator alternatives. That was not always met with with open arms by waste companies that incinerate. But in many cases, they are quite friendly, and if they're already doing that work, they might be willing to do a little bit extra. And then the last source of information that I found quite useful was universities. There's a number of academic resources are a great pool to draw on. And there are academics worldwide that are interested in studying this. And might be a good place to look for help with collecting this data. And once again, with this data, I think you can paint a really compelling picture for the economic power, not just the environmental power behind zero waste systems, particularly for repair, which is your specialty, at the higher end of this, what we call the waste hierarchy, which prevents waste in the first place. So thank you all very much for your time. I think that was a really brief overview of the methodology. Of course, we're going to have questions now, but if you have any more detailed information you really want to drill down on the calculations, please feel free to contact me. And then, of course, if you're interested in reading the report, you can find it at the link here, zerowasteworld.org. And I'm happy to send that information around as well. Alrighty.
Hello.
Thank you, John. Is there already a question? No. Yeah, thank you so much. So, I mean, we have companies in our network, so maybe we should talk to them and ask them whether they might be able to share some data with us or start a project on collecting this data, so we could maybe try and calculate something like this for a German city. And I guess I imagine that waste streams of German cities are pretty similar. So if we get to calculate it for one city, it might be possible to use this data on a more general level. So are there any questions? Yeah, Christina.
Yes, John, just one question. If we have 400 times more jobs for the same amount of products, what does this mean for the costs of using products? I mean, did you, if repair is so much more expensive than thrown away, 400 jobs mean much more work, but also much more costs, isn't it?
I think John,
did you have a look on this effect?
I think John didn't really get the question. I have the, yeah, did you?
You did.
Yeah, I got booted, unfortunately.
Oh, so I guess Christina, you have to repeat.
I have to repeat. Okay, John. I mean, if we have 400 times more jobs for the same amount of products, the use of these products will be more expensive or not?
Mm. Yeah, so we didn't look at downstream costs. So you're just talking about like actual day-to-day operations for a city budget, or
Both, maybe. If you
both? Yeah.
if you pay all these jobs by the city budget, you have you need more taxes.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, someone else in the organization is working on this a number of reports and fact sheets on that exact topic of financial feasibility. Because of course, yeah, exactly. Okay, great idea. Where's the money going to come from? And it depends on the city, but the reality is a lot of cities, they're running out of that space for landfill. And land is expensive. So, I mean, particularly here in San Francisco in the Bay Area, it's, a perfect example. City density around the world is increasing, city populations are increasing.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just becoming more and more expensive, making the alternatives more and more viable, even as costs come down. In the repair sector in particular, and something that GAIA has been really excited about, is trying to expand that idea of zero waste to larger ideas of corporate responsibility, making things easier to recycle, to repair, trying to prevent the waste from being used at all upstream. So there's really significant cost savings that come from grabbing the waste before it even enters the system. And beyond that, it saves that landfill costs. And then there's also a bunch of resources that GAIA has been putting together on the cost of incineration. And the fact that incinerators become these really large, centralized, unwieldy capital projects that require a lot of investment up front and take a long time to pay off. If they ever do, they run into construction problems, they run into technical problems, they run into community opposition because of air pollution, because they're ugly, because they stink, because they're loud. And those all have a cost. And more, as there's more people, cities are faced with that cost. And the idea of a really decentralized system, where with a bunch of, for example, a bunch of small repair outlets and businesses in a city that kind of take that huge waste stream and just split it off into a million pieces and lightly sprinkle the benefits all around. That's becoming a lot more appealing and makes a lot more sense cost-wise. The challenge, of course, is how do you effectively incentivize that as a city? Because a city can recuperate the money that it gets from recycling, for example, because it takes the recycling and it owns it and it sells the plastic when it's finished processing, but it can't claim the benefits from a small repair shop that picks up washing machines from the neighborhood. The city can help incentivize that, but it's hard for the city to collect metrics on how successful that is, and kind of claim the benefits from that. So long story short, yes, it's more costly depending on how you do it, but more and more it's becoming viable because the alternatives are becoming more expensive.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions?
No worries if not. I know it's been a long day for you all.
Christina.
Once more. Well, maybe I did not understand every sentence you said because I'm not so used to hear English talks. Yes, but you told me, you said, if I understood, that you took global studies of all over the world, right? To get your numbers, yeah? So did you find any differences, big differences between, let's say, United States, Europe, and other parts of the world?
Yeah, you're in for repair in particular?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think probably, so let's see, I don't think I have the spreadsheet up, but there definitely were geographic differences. For repair, we only had about 7 or 8 studies, I think, with data that was usable. And they were primarily based in the US and in Europe, where, there's the most work going on looking at this industry. And I think as much as you could look at that and say that there's a geographic difference, I think it will have to do primarily with what material is being processed, and the type of facility, the type of company, basically, because furniture repair very different from computer repair, and I think that's the main determinant of the differences, less than geography. And in some places that number was 100 jobs per 10,000 tons. In other places, I think this one study that looked at the repair sector in the UK for large bulky items like washing machines, dryers, said something like 800 jobs per 10,000 tons. And so it's going to vary hugely depending on where you are, depending on what you're looking at. But the underlying point is 100 is still 100 times more than one job, which is, very, very common for incineration and landfill. Yeah, so it's just a really powerful economic engine. Just all this waste that we're just throwing out the door, tossing into the atmosphere and into our lungs. I think it's really archaic and something we're going to look back on and imagine. It's kind of like the Victorian era where they'd throw the chamber pots, they'd throw the waste out into the sidewalk. I think we'll look back on this 200 years from now and say that burning our trash is pretty equivalent to that.
So if I understand correctly, you say you saw differences between the different waste streams and their potential job potential for repair. So could you tell us something about that? Like which was the sector with most potential, and which waste streams did you look at? You said furniture, I guess electronics, textiles.
Oh, yeah, but I'd say most of the studies so far that I was able to find looked at kind of all-purpose, bulky furniture, large home appliances that are really easy for someone in a neighborhood to just put out some flyers, and people will put them out on the sidewalk because it's a hassle for them to get rid of. And then the other sector that seemed to be most popular is electronics repair, just because it's the most lucrative and it makes the most sense financially to have technicians, because paying more people costs more money. But once again, a fledgling industry, and certainly does not have as much data around it, but increasingly so, and reasonably easy to collect if you have those contacts to just call up and say, hey, how many people do you employ? How much tonnage do you process?
I think there was a question. Yeah, Tao.
Hi. Thank you. I am Tao. I am a textile designer and I'm specialized in reusing textiles. So my knowledge is most on that side. But I have a question related to the question that Christina asked in the beginning. So have you looked at, assuming about the answer that you gave, you have been researching how these new jobs would be created by state institutions. But have you looked at the creation of jobs also by private sectors, or, for example, it's well known that in big secondhand markets in African countries, they reuse and remake with textiles, for example, which we consider landfill the moment they take on the boat, but actually they're already doing all of this reusing. So, I mean, it's just an example, or maybe like take example from what they are doing to apply to our economies to create markets locally where these things would be happening more. Or, for example,
Right.
in Germany, there's a big trend, or like it's really big since ever, to resell clothes and objects through websites, and not only now eBay, but also flea markets and things like that. And how much, are those jobs counted in, or the idea of like not only private people, also private companies to create those jobs? And maybe, yeah, I don't know if you have data on that or some comment.
Yeah, I would say that is not well represented in these averages that we calculated. Those definitely come from more institutional studies, university studies from individual, like kind of large companies. These are the places that are tracking that information, and that whole kind of informal, that whole informal waste prevention market is incredibly important, and it's something that GAIA has looks at fairly carefully in countries with where we do a lot of work with waste pickers, but the work there tends to revolve around working conditions and less around employment. So this is actually kind of a new angle, and yeah, being able to capture that would be really, really interesting. Might do some digging on that. Thank you.
Markus. Yeah.
Yes, hello. Markus from Vienna. Thank you for your presentation. It's more a comment than a question. I think if you don't know how much who is paying for the costs if the jobs are 400 jobs instead of none or something, maybe something we could take as an argument for the cities is that the job creation is in the city and also the money keeps in the city. So we pay people in the city, and so the money is still in the cycle, in the local cycle, because if you don't buy like washing machines or other infrastructure from somewhere mainly out of the city, this could be also an argument, I think, for this recycling and zero waste strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. Why does the city care if, you know, if it doesn't get to see any of the benefits? Yeah.
So any more questions or comments or ideas on how we could calculate some data here in Germany? Or ideas on who to ally with? So John, do you have any more studies planned, like on repair or zero waste instruments or policies?
Yeah, well, the next phase that we're hoping to collect data on, and this might be much longer term, but well, visiting the Zero Waste World website will have a bunch of different resources, particularly on this series for beyond economic recovery. But the next phase we're hoping to look at is other parts of this world that prevent waste in the first place. How do you create city programs or state programs that incentivize, you know, the creation of companies that make reusable water bottles, for example, or grocery stores that, you know, let you buy in bulk and prevent waste packaging? How do you incentivize that corporation level of waste prevention by designing it into the materials themselves in packaging? And so that's kind of, I think, the next frontier in zero waste policy, and we're very excited about it.
Yeah.
And more information can be found on the GAIA website.
Yeah, we'll send this around for sure. Again, with your study again. So if there are no more questions, I think we can. Well, thank you again, John, for presenting us your findings. And then I think we can close the session if there are no more comments or things to say.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all, and thank you for your ideas and thoughts and questions. And I hope to meet you all in the future.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
say hi when you're in Berlin.
Bye bye.
Yeah.
Great work.
Okay. Likewise.
Great work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And have a good evening or day.
Thanks. Bye.